Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and this will be part 2 of the video series on how to progress hypertrophy training, and in this video we will cover how hypertrophy training can be progressed from week to week. In the previous video, we covered the basic theory of progressive overload and overloading training and how it relates to hypertrophy training. Now we will cover how we can practically apply this to a training program. Before we get into the details of how to progress hypertrophy training from week to week, it should be noted that there are many different ways to progress a program. There is no single best way to progress training, and programming may change based on your specific context. However, here are some examples of how training can be progressed and how they can be manipulated. Let's now cover what progression methods we can implement to progress hypertrophy from week to week. The first method of progression is to strictly program increases in work each set, which we will term absolute progression. This refers to directly programming a specific number of sets, reps, and load each week, and increasing the number of reps or load for each exercise each week. This will directly increase work required by the muscle and will likely result in muscle growth over time. For example, a simple absolute progression model may look something like this. For this example, let's use the dumbbell shoulder press. Over a 4-week program, the exercise may be progressed in the following way. In week 1, we have 3 sets of 10 reps with a load of 15 kilos. In week 2, we have 3 sets of 11 reps with 15 kilos. In week 3, we have 3 sets of 12 reps with 15 kilos. And in week 4, we have 3 sets of 12 reps with 17.5 kilos. So each week there is a clear increase in either reps or load lifted, which requires more total work by the shoulders over time. While this method makes logical sense, it runs into many issues. Primarily, it attempts to predict the rate of progression for the trainee each week. It is highly unlikely that a trainee will be able to improve this fast from week to week unless they are a complete novice. Furthermore, no trainee can progress at a consistent rate each and every week. If trainees could increase rep performance or load lifted every single week by a small amount, then if we extrapolate this over a 10-year lifting career, the same trainee would be dumbbell shoulder pressing over 100 kilos. This simply doesn't happen in reality. Therefore, this progression model is probably best suited only for novice trainees so they can simply understand the concept of progressive overload and to learn how to train with high effort. Another form of progressing from week to week is by increasing volume, or more specifically increasing volume by a number of sets. This would be applied simply by increasing how many sets are performed each week for each muscle group until a maximum volume is reached. Then the trainee would deload and repeat this process. For example, let's take our dumbbell shoulder press example. In the first week we have 2 sets of 10 with 15 kilos, then 3 sets of 10 with 15 kilos, then 4, then 5 sets of 10 in the last week. This can then be repeated again in the next mesocycle with 11 reps each set or with 17.5 kilos. This is a fine way to progress hypertrophy training and would probably yield great hypertrophy outcomes. However, it may not be necessary to rapidly ramp volume up and down over time. This is because the total volume across the mesocycle is more important than the individual weekly volume. Therefore, it probably wouldn't make much difference if we increase volume each week, or we maintain the same average volume each week. Next, we have progression via reps in reserve. This refers to increasing the proximity to failure each week until we reach almost 0 reps in reserve for each exercise by the end of the mesocycle. Then trainees can deload and repeat the same progression scheme. This will naturally require trainees to perform more reps or load each week, but this will allow such progression to be auto-regulated. Trainees can progress at their own individual rate based on how they respond to the training program. For example, the dumbbell shoulder press may be performed for 3 sets each week with a load of 15 kilos. In week 1, each set is performed with 3 reps in reserve. In week 2, each set is performed with 2 reps in reserve, and so on until 0 reps in reserve are performed in week 4. Trainees can then record how many reps they performed with each set and see how they are progressing over time. For example, the trainee may perform the following reps for each set in each session. As we can see, rep performance naturally increases slightly over time since sets are taken closer to failure each week. This is probably a more appropriate progression scheme for most trainees who have a basic understanding of proximity to failure. This is because it allows trainees to progress at their own individual rate, which cannot be predicted by strict prescriptions. It also accounts for fluctuations in performance from session to session and allows adjustments in technique. And the last form of microcycle progression is to use an auto-regulated approach. This refers to keeping a static number of sets and proximity to failure, and adjusting reps and load performed each session. So basically, the program doesn't actually change, trainees just perform the sessions and observe progress over time. For example, a trainee may perform the dumbbell shoulder press for 3 sets at 1 to 2 reps in reserve for each week. Performance over the 4-week period may look something like this. Here we can see that there are fluctuations in performance over time, although there seems to be a general trend in a positive direction over time. Furthermore, trainees may actually see reductions in performance at certain points if they change their technique or tempo. This program allows for these changes to be made because there is no rigid progression model. This form of progression allows for fluctuations in performance over time from readiness, motivation, technique adjustments, rest periods, and more. Trainees can simply focus on providing the best training stimulus to the muscle and observe what response we see in the program. So rather than strictly prescribing any variables, we are adjusting based on the trainee's response. However, this requires trainees to have a decent level of training experience to make informed decisions about what needs to be adjusted and when. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.